You ready to rock and roll, Conrad? Oh, we can't hear you. Oh no, you sound a little squeaky. So you know what? I'm gonna kick us off. My name is Vanessa Kaufman, and I am the director of the Alliance to Stop Foodborne Illness, a program which brings together consumers, industry, academics, and regulators to work collaboratively to advance food safety culture throughout the food system. And Conrad Fournier is going to moderate this wonderful webinar with me today. We're going to give him a couple of minutes to rejoin and hopefully fix the tech problems. But we are so pleased to have you join us as we kick off a new season of 7 food safety culture webinars. In case you missed any of the season 1 webinars, we encourage you to visit our website, stopfoodborneillness.org, or scan the QR code right here to watch the recordings, view the slides, and read the accompanying white papers, which are chock full of real-world learnings. Last season was spread out over nearly 3 years, but we heard from you all that you wanted more webinars, so we'll be bringing you 7 during the next 12 months. We also heard that you liked the interactive component, so we'll be keeping loads of time for Q&A at the end. We've also incorporated panelists from more diverse industry sectors and sizes of companies. And over the year, we'll be hearing from people who might not necessarily have food safety culture or food safety in their titles. I'll leave it to my esteemed colleagues to tell you more about the mechanics of the series, but I wanted to kick off with a super warm welcome. We're so glad you're here. Um, and let's see, did we get Conrad back? Conrad, you're here.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All
Wonderful.
right, great. Thanks. And sorry about that. Hello, everyone. I am Conrad Fournier from FDA, and we're very happy to be here in first season 2. On behalf of FDA, I want to tell Stop how pleased we are with this collaboration with their organization to help foster and support food safety culture across the food system. And so I want to just give a little bit of an overview of today's. Just some housekeeping. So just as if you're not aware, we are recording this. And so if you aren't able to tune into the whole session, or if some of your colleagues weren't able to join today, they will be able to view the recording at a later time. You can get some continuing education credits. If you have any questions, use the Q&A function, not the chat. And anyone who sees a question that they'd also like answered, you can use the upvote, and that'll prioritize those questions for us. And hopefully after today's session, you'll spend a few minutes to give us some feedback. And so today we have lined up a number of great speakers for our panel. In addition to Vanessa and I, so we have some panelists here. We have my colleague Steve Hermansky from FDA, Lone Jesperson from Cultivate, Sherry Brice from WK Kellogg, and Stefanie Evans from Danone to talk about their experiences with food safety culture on this topic today. And we'll have a great discussion where we'll be able to answer any of the questions that you might have. And with that, I will pass it on to Steve.
Good morning, good afternoon, all. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be part of this. Thanks, Conrad. And as Conrad said, I am Steve Hermansky. I'm a senior science advisor at FDA. I had 30 years in industry before joining the agency. Food safety culture is easy to say, but it's really hard to achieve. It requires engagement from all levels of the organization. The CEO can and should have a message about food safety culture, and that message should be repeated across all supervisory levels of the organization. But the people that really make it happen are those of us on the front lines. If they don't hear and believe the importance of food safety, then you don't have the right culture, regardless of your words, and your efforts can be wasted. Everyone across all levels of the organization plays a role in food safety. Food safety culture is when everyone believes it and feels empowered to make a difference. Actions speak much louder than words, and whether you believe it or not, everyone in your organization is watching how you behave more than what you say. Your enemies are complacency and, just as importantly, your behavior under pressure. It is easy to talk about food safety culture when everything is going well, but it's a lot harder during a crisis, when equipment is down, you're short-staffed, or your supply chain failed. Will food safety remain top of mind during those times? That will depend upon your culture. Hopefully, this STOP webinar series, both last year's as well as that coming up this year, will help you critically evaluate your food safety culture. I encourage you to think about food safety culture, to use these webinars as a way to critically evaluate how your food safety culture is, and use this opportunity to learn, get to know some of your colleagues, and collaborate across organizations on food safety culture. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague Lone for some additional opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you to STOP and FDA for putting on another series of webinars. We've chosen this time to use Edgar Schein's framework that takes culture and cuts it into layers as the framework for the series. Because it's different topics, it's different tactics that you want to select, whether you're at the top of the pyramid where it's what you see and feel, it's the posters on the walls, it's how you see, as Steve just said, other people behaving. Contrary to if you're going into those espoused values, so what is it that you hear people say and do? Walking the talk, Steve talked about that as well. And when we really get into the thick and the deepest level of culture, then we're talking about those underlying beliefs. And Steve talked about that as well. You believe what you hear if you understand it. And I think that really speaks into the topic that we are here to talk about today in the panel. It's about looking at how we turn problems into opportunities. So we're really at the center of the pyramid in and around espoused values. I want to just start out setting the scene around this a little bit by saying, when we turn problems into opportunities, we really have to reset how we're presenting the problem so that it does become an opportunity that others and ourselves can make decisions on. Again, I go back to Steve's message. You believe it when you hear it, if it's consistently also acted on by those around us. So let's take an example out of what many of us work with every day, environmental monitoring. So in a traditional way, we look at, if we go to the next slide, Lily, we look at environmental monitoring in a very simple way. We might take a control chart, we put in our findings from the swabs, and then we get some we can act on depending on what these data points lie. Now, that is simple for some people in food safety as professionals to act on something like what we have in front of us right now. It can actually be harder to believe if we're in some other functional areas like food or HR or in finance, or if we're at the front of the sanitation crew at midnight. So let's try and look at numbers in a slightly different way when we turn problems into opportunities. Next slide, please. Looking at, we take the next slide, Lily. If we're looking at how the traditional EMP is used today, we look at it's really good for process control. We can have some technical decisions and we can do some degree of predicting the future. What it's not so good at is that we can't just put that chart up in any kind of context and then expect people to understand what it means. So it's actually hard to understand the significance of it without translation. It can also be disconnected from business decisions. So what's the risk of having those data points above the red line? How do I translate that into a risk to my business? And it can certainly, and I'm sorry for those of you out there who might have an emotional attachment to your EMP programs, but for the majority of those that we work with in food companies, it can be really difficult to emotionally attach to an EMP run chart or control chart like we just looked at. So we've got to look at data in a slightly different way. If we look at big numbers on the next slide, please. We all know that today about 420,000 people, it's estimated, die every year due to foodborne illness. That's a very big number. It's actually also very difficult to emotionally be attached to. What if we were to take that number and turn that problem into an opportunity that's easier for all of us to get attached to by saying it's almost enough people to populate the city the size of Manchester or Miami. So now it's almost something that many people can say, oh, I can relate to that. Those are big cities. Are you telling me that we're wiping out Manchester every year? So turning our problems into opportunities is also making sure that we present those informations that we have already in a slightly different way. Let me take you through really quickly an example of what that could look like. This is a fictive management team based on one of our clients. Bernie is the HR manager. We also have Emily, who is the food safety and quality manager. In addition to that, we have Lee, who is in charge of everything commercial, and he is joined on the team by Amitra, who is looking after everything when it comes to procurement. And in addition to that, we have Kirsten, who's the CEO, and finally we have on the left here, Austin, who's really looking after anything that has to do with engineering. So we've got a really well-rounded management team who we had the pleasure of working with for some time. So take this management team, and we go to the next slide, please. Going back to EMP visualization. What we could say is that instead of putting a run chart in front of them, maybe it's about saying that all Willy Wah managers, so the team you just met, they consume 3 meals per day. So that's done 365 days a year. They all consume their products. Take that daily EMP positive rate and then translate that into at-risk meals instead of just a percentage number that can be very difficult to emotionally relate to. So in this case, 0.1% findings equals 1 at-risk meal. If you go to the next one. So in this case, Kirsten, as the CEO, is facing the challenge of saying, okay, we have some problems. I want my team to really understand how we're doing when it comes to environmental monitoring, but I want to do that in a way so that it's actually something they can relate to. And next slide, please. So here could be something that we do. We say we need to have 2 messages coming from Kirsten on a weekly basis. What is this week's EMP results and why is it significant to our business? So she needs to be able to communicate that. But she's also going to talk about why these results were personal to her. So it could be something like this, where she's just talking about we delivered all of this product and 99.9% of them were safe because of our joint standard. But everybody out there, you're working hard, and especially line 4, who found and removed 2 positive findings this week. So she's relating back out to the team. And then she is also saying that she's the one that this week got the at-risk meal that was contaminated with salmonella. So this would be an example of saying when we have a problem, so it's problematic when we have pathogen findings, but find a way, be creative, take that reframing approach and say, how can we take these results, communicate them in a different way so that we can really get everybody to emotionally connect? Because I go back to Steve's point, you have to believe it. You have to see what others are doing around food safety for you to be able to say that we are improving because we're solving our problems and we're looking at it as opportunities. With that, I am going to hand it over to the fantastic Sherry to take us away on the next story.
Hello, and thank you for having me today. Thank you, Lone. I appreciate that. So I am Sherry Brice. I am the Chief Supply Chain Officer for WK Kellogg. Our iconic brand portfolio includes Frosted Flakes, Rice Krispies, Fruit Loops, Kashi, Special K, Raisin Bran, and Bare Naked. And I know some of you probably have eaten some of those cereals. With a presence in majority of our U.S. households across North America, our brands play a key role in enhancing the lives of millions. We also try to enhance the millions by promoting a strong sense of physical, emotional, and societal well-being. Our beloved brand characters include Tony the Tiger, Toucan Sam, and represents our deep connection with the consumer and the community in which we serve. So you see a picture of cornflakes on the screen. If you think about that, we have to make sure that we are serving safe foods to the people that love and want to feed their families. What began with a cornflake has since defined an industry. As today, millions of our families around the world provide a delicious choice of brands that trust and love that have a place at the table. And what we want to do is to make sure we're creating joy and happiness around the table every day. We must make safe food and foods that taste good so we can continue to deliver and promote the fact that food safety is a core competency for us and at the top of everything we do. Next slide. So I take the responsibility and the privilege very serious. You'll see me on the picture right there. I'm actually with some of my team members, and we're actually looking at sanitation. It is important that we role model what it means to engage with our people all throughout the organization. I grew up in quality and food safety and spent a good deal of my career on ensuring our foods are safe and the quality standards that we have are the right ones. I'm now in my position as Chief Supply Chain Officer. I am also motivated by the ability to actually create the culture required to support food safety and ownership necessary at all levels of the organization. Yes, there are technical skills required in my previous role that are critical, and I actually use them today, but the leadership skills are also critical. One of the things that I want to talk about today, if you think about turning a problem into an opportunity, it's important that every leader in the organization is actually engaged. An example is, along with myself and our Chief Growth Officer, the company wanted to get involved in some licensing projects. So really looking at something that's outside of our core competency. And we had to engage differently because we didn't have a well-defined process or program for licensing. So we had to look cross-functional. We had to go outside and look at how do we do that. And we had to make sure that we were taking the non-core competency of licensing and actually turning it into something that was a strength of ours because it was an important portion of our business. And that's why it's important to engage the whole business, not just manufacturing when you think about food safety, but the whole business in the end. So what that started with was our 8 steps to looking at turning a problem into an opportunity. You can turn to the next slide, please. This is our approach. So when you think about it, you got to first make sure you are clear on who's accountable. So in this case of looking at a licensing project that it really wasn't a core competency for our company, and really saying, how do we make sure we assess what the program is? How do we make sure that we design a well-defined program? We look at the requirements. We have the training. We look at how are we going to monitor and verify that the program actually is going to do what we expect it to do? And then how do you actually go and make sure you have verification into the program? And then you design it and embed it. The circle is very important because you have to make sure that you're doing all of the steps, especially when you are seeing that you have an opportunity here, because that's how you turn a problem actually into an opportunity. So everyone must be focused on making the right food at the right time. It's important that we're taking and building the ownership, the processes, and the measures that ensure safe quality food each and every time you do whatever the program is. In addition to that, one of the things that's really important is that you're looking end to end and you're including the business because you also want to train them. So as they're looking at, okay, I have this opportunity, how can they also have a foundational knowledge of what is required and why is it required? The why is very important. And that's Lone was talking about telling a story. It is important to help us reframe for people that may not have the technical understanding of what's required, especially at the business level, that this is why this is important. And this is how you go about it so that you have a successful outcome at the end. And because realistically, every part of the organization wants to be successful. So it's important. We have found that it's important to follow these steps because it really helps you to embed into the DNA of the company that food safety is a priority and cannot be compromised. Next slide, please. So when you think about that, our approach to food safety culture is all about engaging. I talked about engaging with the business. It is important that the business understands the why. It's important to educate every part of the business, and it's important to empower. And when you have all 3 E's, it equates to continuous improvement, and then you can replicate, making sure you're reapplying those learnings to the next problem or the next opportunity. Again, if you engage, educate, and empower, it literally helps to exacerbate what you want all throughout the organization. And the key is everybody understanding food safety, the why behind food safety, and what the implications are when you do not follow your established program. Next page, please. So 3 takeaways. 1, lead by example. Engage, engage, engage. It is very important to make sure that you're engaging. Roll up your sleeves and lead by example. This includes with your people, with your peers, like I talked about in the licensing example. Helping your C-suite and board members, even the board being engaged is important to understand quality and food safety principles, while you also help deepen the understanding of their areas of the business. So it's important to understand where the business is coming from, but it's really important for the business to understand why we require the things that we require. Also, confirm that your program and your culture are supportive of the actions needed to mitigate the risk and then proactively solve the problem. This includes committing to providing the appropriate resources to ensure compliance. Again, the business had to invest in additional resourcing through the licensing program, but they understood why they needed to invest the additional resources. So then it actually becomes a whole end-to-end approach and an end-to-end collaborative process going forward. And it also helps you really look at how do you plan, do, check, and act. It is extremely important that you plan, you do, and then that whole circle, you're checking, and then you're adjusting as required. And then that's how you embed and make sure you're designing the right things from start to finish. So again, I would say it is critical that you're doing all 3 of these takeaways as you look at how do you really, truly turn a problem into an opportunity, because where things can happen, the key is taking those learnings from the things that happen and embedding the right corrective and appropriate actions to make sure that it's not a continuous problem. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Stefanie.
Thank you, Sherry, and apologies, I was having a moment there trying to get myself on video. Thank you for the intro, Sherry. My name is Stefanie Evans. I'm Vice President, Quality, Food Safety, Sourcing, and Design with Danone. Sourcing and design simply means that I'm in charge of our supplier quality co-manufacturing network from a quality and food safety standpoint, and design is that innovation and productivity process piece. So you can go to the next slide. And I wanted to be clear, I work for Danone North America. So we're the North American part of the global Danone organization. And I'm going to talk more specifically about a problem, how to turn a problem into an opportunity related to co-manufacturing and supplier quality, as I said, that third-party relationship, which is incredibly important. So next slide, please. This is our mission and our vision as Danone, bringing health through food to as many people as possible. And so if you'd go to the next slide, Lily, I wanted to go over some of our brands because a lot of people don't know the name Danone or Danone North America. These are several of the brands that we have here in North America. We have what we call beverage creation. So a lot of people know Silk almond milk or Silk soy milk. And we also have the Stoke brands, international like coffee creamers. We also play in the plant-based space quite a bit. We have a pretty broad yogurt portfolio. Many of you might know the Oikos brand, but we also make Silk yogurt as well, and then several brands for kids. And then a lot of people don't know that we're also in what we call specialized nutrition, which is medical nutrition. So things specific to people who need specialized nutrition if they're allergic to particular amino acids or things like that, as well as baby and infant food. And that's our infant nutrition division there that you can see in the middle. Also want to call out that opinions in this deck are my views and not necessarily the views of my employer. And with that overview of Danone North America, let's dive into what I'd like to talk about today. So I wanted to talk about the importance of challenging old beliefs. So I think, Lone talked about environmental monitoring and how we utilize that, which I think from a quality and food safety perspective is very easy metric for us to understand and one that we all follow. However, what we find is that as you go up inside the organization or even outside of the organization, as you work with new partners in either supply or co-manufacturing, it's a little difficult to understand what it means, as Lone mentioned. And And what we have found is it's not as useful a tool as it could be in communicating food safety, and that there are other ways that maybe we need to discuss it. So the other part that we've noticed is that, it's very hard, particularly in manufacturing, to do things differently. People get comfortable, they get used to doing things a certain way. We also believe that things are static and stay the same. And so there's a lot of importance in challenging our old beliefs when things happen. So if we could go to the next slide. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit here is, as I said, an issue in our co-manufacturing network that we dealt with a while back. And we have issues, honestly, every day. And we have to learn how to handle that when it comes to partners, because it's very different than it is when it's internal manufacturing. So we see this frequently in the industry. A historically safe product results in recalls and outbreaks due to a pathogen contamination. There's a lot of interesting cases out there in the media that we've seen happen. I think one that surprised me was when we had a problem with onions being contaminated with pathogens. We saw some donuts and baked goods that were a concern a while back. Extended shelf life beverages, cantaloupe, freeze-dried fruit, you name it. It feels like every day something new gets implicated in pathogen recall or outbreak. And as I said, I think sometimes we hang our hat on this environmental monitoring as a good signal for us. But I would actually say that there are a lot of other weak signals that we should be paying attention to. So this is a term that we use in our organization, weak signals, that we need to pay closer attention to. So what do I mean by a weak signal? Well, it could be just simply upticks in counts in your environment. So maybe sanitation is indicating that there's a change in your manufacturing environment that you should consider, or maybe there is something else, in the environment, a roof leak or a drain or something that's causing problems in your manufacturing environment that hasn't shown that there are any pathogens in the plant, but are indicating that something is off. I think there can be other things too, externally, that could happen. Maybe you're seeing an uptick in off-taste complaints from your consumers, or maybe you're seeing something else out there in market that is not typical for your type of a product. These weak signals are things that we can't ignore. And I think it's very important that we dig deeper on them. So what do we do? Well, so the goal of this is talking about how to embed root cause analysis and CAPAs and things like that into our factories and into our, in this case, co-manufacturing and supplier quality relationships. So the biggest issue that we see often is that problems are rarely attributed to one nice, simple root cause. People like to grasp onto something that seems like the right explanation. And it's easy and we can fix it very quickly and we move on. But a true CAPA can't really be developed until we've considered all contributing factors. It's unfortunate, but the challenge that we're faced with is that these things are typically quite complex, and there's usually not one simple root cause, but a multifactorial event that has occurred and come together all at once to create an issue for us. So we can't stop too soon in that process and find that answer and move on. I think one call out I'll make is the number of times we see on a root cause analysis blaming training, people, or procedures. It's really not sufficient, because that still means there's something underneath that. So even if we say training is a cause of an issue, well, did we not train well? Did the training not land? I think I saw in the chat someone asked about culture and how we make sure, when we have a varied culture in our manufacturing sites, how we make sure that training is understood by different types of people. Similar with people, if things are happening on a plant floor, we find a lot of times that if there's not an easy way to do something right, an operator will find a way to get it done, and it may not be the way we want it to get done. So again, when people might be the root cause, we often find that it's because we haven't given them the tools or the information they need to do it the right way. And programs, similarly, I think sometimes we have these really well-written programs on paper. We can pass our SQF audits, we can do things like that. But when we really dig into a procedure and we think about, can I actually execute this on the plant floor? We often find that it's just not written to be done in a manufacturing environment. The other thing we'll often do on a root cause analysis is once we've gone through it and we think, okay, we've got it, this is it, we've got our multiple answers that we need to go after, is to have someone look at it who's not close to the problem. And the reason for that is sometimes you get so embedded in the situation you're dealing with that you can't see, I guess, the forest through the trees, as you might say. And it helps sometimes to have someone else look at it and pressure test where you are. So I think that's really important for making sure that you've really done a thorough job of looking at the situation that you might be managing. My last call out on RCA and CAPA and some of that is third parties. So it's much harder to embed this food safety culture in this process into an entity that you're not in control of, but you have to rely on your partnership and your collaboration with that entity to accomplish these types of things. And so it can be a hard lesson to learn, and I think everyone in the food industry has, but there are partners and relationships out there that just don't work well. And you have to have a partner that wants that quality and food safety culture embedded in their company and their factories as well. And you need to help them build that culture, we find frequently, because we're often working with maybe smaller companies or companies that may not have as much technical background as we do here in Danone North America. And that collaboration and partnership is absolutely important, that we recognize that from the top all the way down onto the plant floor. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just walk through that opportunity that I alluded to with our co-manufacturing. So like I said, we have rebuilt our co-manufacturing system. And what do I mean by that? We have beefed up, first of all, our resources in making sure that we have a really strong team that can spend more time with our co-manufacturing groups and partners, being in their facilities, if only just to visit and be able to walk the floor with them and be available. But we've also instituted an audit system as well. And that audit system allows us to bring then in, like I said, a person outside of the scope of that manufacturing site that hasn't been in it before, that can come in and audit and ask questions and be new eyes on the ground that might see things that our managers that spend a lot of time in those sites might not see. We've engaged our internal partners. What I mean by that is our procurement partners have become critically important in our relationship with our co-manufacturing and supplier quality network, and an important part of our contractual obligations. So our internal partners have become very aware of how important it is to make sure that they also are looking for partners out there that want to build that quality and food safety culture with us, and find that really important to them as well. I mentioned a little bit on checks and balances. We have an audit program now that we do. We have our managers going in to help our co-manufacturing network improve when we do find issues on an audit. It's not about just throwing it over to them and saying, here, we found these things wrong, go fix it. It's about how can we help them get better? How can we help them fix anything that might be uncovered? We also have a new digital system where we put in these RCAs and these CAPAs. And the convenient thing there is it allows other people to visually see the process we've gone through and ask questions, but also keep a log and make sure that we can pull from that and learn from it and embed anything we've learned from these issues further into our network and don't have the same things occurring over and over again. I also mentioned the challenging all of our old beliefs. So as I said, I think we continue to find historically that the world continues to evolve, and we continue to find issues in areas where we didn't expect us to have a problem. And so everything is on the table now in terms of, have we thought of any risk we might have in anything that we need to be addressing? I mentioned we added a process to look at weak signals. Anytime anything is brought up, when someone says, is this a weak signal or isn't it? We have a conversation about it and try to decide, hey, could this be telling us something else that's going on that we need to take a look at? And it's been a great process to add. And then we've already been talking about that focus on food safety and quality culture, but also making sure that our partners have that same drive as we do to embed that throughout our organizations. So next slide, please, Lily. So my three big key takeaways are our third-party relationships are extremely important, and we must choose them wisely. They need to be the right partners. They need to want to work with us. They need to want to improve. They need to want to learn, and we need to want to learn with them. So it's just extremely important that we can build solid relationships with those third parties. And then, as I said, expect the unexpected and challenge everything. Challenge those old beliefs. When you do a food safety hazard analysis, have you really thought of everything? Have you considered anything unexpected that could happen in your environment? And then really dig until you find that difficult true answer, as we like to say. Not the easy solution, not the check the box, not a situation where we say, okay, it's done, let's move on, but that you've really dug deep and figured out how to make whatever you're going to do going forward sustainable. And that is all for me. Again, I thank STOP and FDA for the invitation, and I look forward to any questions that have popped up during our time.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And there have been quite a few questions that have popped up, so I encourage everyone to keep putting those into the Q&A and upvote the ones that you would like for us to ask. I think, Conrad, you had one that you wanted to ask.
Sure, yeah, I'll kick things off, and it probably relates mostly to Stephanie, but I'd like to hear if Sherry has some thoughts on this. You were talking about root cause analysis, and you were talking about engaging people not too close to the problem, and don't stop too soon. A lot of questions in the chat related to engaging the CEO, and so when you talk about talking to a lot of people and not stopping too soon, it sounds like resources, right? And so how do you ensure the buy-in of the CEO, keep them engaged through the process, and any thoughts that you might have in that case?
Yeah, so I think that, one thing that we've worked really hard on is making sure that we're sharing important information up through the CEO. So whether that be, good things that have happened, but also things that we are watching. So, if we're dealing with a particular issue, obviously it's important to keep the CEO apprised of anything that is important. But also that I think one metric that is really easy for our leadership to understand are consumer complaints and consumer metrics. And so that is probably the easiest one that we funnel up through the chain and use to drive some of this conversation around where we need to be focusing as an organization, right? So if we see an uptick in complaints in a specific area, how are we addressing it and what support do we need? It seems to be one of those tools that's much easier to understand than obviously a CEO doesn't really, grasp environmental monitoring or some of that more fundamental data to a quality and food safety person. But we do use consumer complaint information a lot to help communicate what's happening.
Right.
So the only thing I would add, Conrad, is I actually think it's important not to let a crisis go to waste. So one of the things that I think is important is that you ensure that you're actually making sure you get a platform to review food safety incidents at the CEO level. You have to. You got to make it not. So if you have an EMP hit, if you have a trend, you should be making sure that it bubbles up. Also, because I've seen a question around boards. So a lot of times there are board reportables, and that you should have that established at the beginning of every year to say, okay, these are the board reportables that I need to make sure I give the board some type of understanding of what's going on from a food safety perspective. I think it's important to also educate. So one of the things that we have done is we actually went and gave them, not because, at the C-suite level, you're not going to give them all the details, but the key things that are critical to making the business run and what can get us in trouble, educating them on those things, and then helping to make sure they know this is how frequent we should be looking at them so that we engage them on the journey to improve the culture across the board. And that's how you can engage every level of the organization, is by making sure that you're actually not let those crises that you may have had in the past, dig them out and say, okay, these are the things that we put in place. These are the metrics that we put in place too, that we need to make sure that we keep in the forefront.
Conrad, I'm going to add a point in there. So we had the pleasure of looking back at 10 years worth of data where we've measured food safety culture. And one of the things that we can show is that leadership presence is directly correlating to, for example, GMP practices. So I think I totally agree with Stephanie and Sherry, and I think there's some great best practices there. I think we can also just help our, not just CEO, but executives have a voice on food safety. help them find their voice on food safety. So what it means that is that when they do go out and they're in plants at Kellogg's or Danone or some other companies, that they, for example, have a Gemba card in hand where they have something very specific they can ask and they can listen. They can show they have 2 of these and 1 of this. So I think getting that voice is something that we as food safety professionals can get better at helping our leaders with, and it has a direct correlation to performance.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lone. One of the questions that has come in that's kind of related to what we're talking about here and maybe drills down a little bit more, it is from Anonymous. When auditing suppliers, which qualitative and quantitative indicators best reflect the depth and maturity of their food safety culture beyond basic compliance metrics and observations on the plant floor?
So I can take that first. I said one of the things that I look for is who's in the room, who's at the kickoff, who's in the room during the audit, who's doing the tour. If you have leadership other than the quality leadership, that is a key indicator that you actually have a different culture. So it cannot just be quality, because quality is not the only one that owns it. It has to be operations. It has to be the senior leadership in that supplier or that facility. So I look for who's in the room, who's part of the tour, who's at kickoff, because those are key indicators of the food safety culture that they have.
Yes, I completely agree with Sherry. That's a very important factor. We find that a lot in the audits that we do, is who shows up to that closeout meeting and who wants to know what the findings were. I think you also see it when you do walk the plant floor and what the response is, whether you get it from an operator in terms of what kind of training they've had or what kind of power they're given, in terms of if they see something wrong on the manufacturing floor, what they can do about that. I think that's a huge indicator of how important that culture is in their plants. But I also think that there's a continuous improvement mindset that we tend to look at and try to gauge in terms of, are we here to make money, or are we here to continuously improve and make sure that we're putting out the best products that we can. And it's easy to notice those suppliers that are truly invested in making their plants run better and improve versus that we're just trying to churn something out the door.
The one other thing that I think is also as important is if they're giving you feedback on things that you can do better to make them more successful when it comes to running your food. I think that's also a key indicator, because you want a partner in this, not just a person that's going to hear from you, but you want to hear from them to make sure that they're really having the partnership. And that's telling, like, look, if they see some opportunity in specifications, if they see opportunities in how you're looking at allergens, they should be giving you that feedback. So if you're not getting any feedback from them, I think it's all about re-looking at the partnership and reassessing how do you get that from them.
Stephanie, you used the term continuous improvement, and then in your slides, you mentioned questioning old beliefs. Can you give an example of one of those old beliefs that you questioned and changed?
Yes, so I think there have been a number of things, like I said, that that I think the interesting one for me has been, a hazard analysis is so basic. We've been doing it for a very long time, right? And it can sometimes feel like a check the box activity. But we had an incident where when we really dug into that hazard analysis, we realized that we had some gaps. And it was because we were just moving through a process and like I said, kind of checking the box versus saying, have we truly considered all risks in this case? So we recently had an incident where we had an issue with some product we received from a supplier. And when we really dug into it, we realized that we had a gap in that initial hazard assessment in terms of how the supplier was filling a particular package. Luckily, in this case, it was just mold. It wasn't a pathogen issue. But once we dug into it, we said, oh, we missed something here. We missed the environment that this supplier is in and how they're filling this type of package. So we had to go back and redo that assessment. I think that happens more often than we want to admit. And it may slip by, but we've got to be more, I guess, thoughtful on that process and be more open-minded about the things that can go wrong. There's just been a lot of things, I think, in the industry that we thought have historically been not a big deal or not a problem. In this case, it was a, low water activity, high sugar product. You'd think, oh, nothing should grow in it, right? Well, wrong. Certainly if you get some mold in there, you can. So.
Sherry, you got anything to
So I would
add?
say our internal auditing program. So similar, people can become robotic over time. So if you have the same process, times are evolving. So you have to make sure you're evolving your programs with what's going on in the industry so that you're truly making sure you're continuously improving. So really looking at what's required from a seek and destroy program when it comes to EMP. We don't just look for zone 3s and 4s, right? Look at zone 2s and actually also zone 1. So it's really making sure you reevaluate your programs. And that's what we have done a lot of, is looking at our internal auditing program and making sure that it's effective for today, and effective based on what you're seeing across your network, both internally and external network.
Conrad?
Yes.
I'm sort of I'm struggling with which one to choose, but I actually think the one that in this context of a problem to opportunity is the one where we're saying, well, as part of food safety, we verify. So we verify and we put some checks in boxes and we file a file somewhere and we say, therefore, we have a process that's doing what we're supposed to, or it's supposed to, and people have verified it. We have seen just over the last couple of years where organizations are starting to do these forensic audits, meaning that they actually go in and they deep dive on some of their own plants, that there is a substantial number of verification activities. FDA, put your earmuffs on, Steve, turn them off, that are that checks in boxes, that pencil whipping, they are filled out because we have to, not because we link it to what we're doing is making safe food. I think that's a really critical belief that we have to change in many food companies, where we say, okay, let's just backtrack on that whole exercise and say, have we actually used something, for example, like the great stop resources, to say, this is why we do what we do. We're saving lives. Every time that you verify that that metal detector is doing what it's supposed to do, you save lives. And making that human connection to verification activities, I think that's a really big belief that we have control over in most food companies, that we can make that change. Tell your own stories, get your CEO to tell her story, right? Because there's good stories in all food companies, but challenging whether just because we verified something, it's actually working the way it's supposed to. I think that's a big one to challenge.
I think it's a good call out, and I'll just add to that I think you're right. Again, it goes back to that kind of checkbox system versus what's the reality of what you're seeing, right? So a metal detector is easy, or X-ray or something like that. For an operator, it's, oh, we had an issue, we stopped the line. I'm dealing with that because I have to, because it's my job, not because I'm thinking about how that impacts the consumer. And certainly when we do our trainings, we try to take those real world examples out to the facilities so we can say, this is what happens, right? This, this consumer encountered this in our product. This is how they saw what happened. And I think it's really important, like I said, to make it a story, to make it relatable, instead of a check the box activity.
Completely agree, Stephanie. Absolutely. And I think it ties really nicely to Steve's opening as well. Are we walking the talk? Are we tying it back to, and that ties back to the topic. Yeah, Mike.
So I'm seeing a number of questions in the chat related to CAPA. And first, an easy question, because there may be people online that don't know what CAPA stands for. Can someone please tell us? And then secondly, there's one specifically to you, Sherry, related to, you said accountability is first, then assessment, and then CAPA. And so someone looking for you to talk through an example about that CAPA portion.
So CAPA is corrective actions, preventive actions. And one of the things that's important about, so accountability is who is actually going to own whatever the problem is. You got to have a single owner. A lot of times we say this person owns a part, this personal part, it's important to have a sole owner, accountable person. And then that person has to get the right people together, not do it in a silo, but the right people together and assess the situation, assess it in the end to make sure we're not forgetting anything. And that's where it flows into the CAPA, because you want to get what is the corrective action, but then what are the preventative actions that we have to put in place so that we don't have it happen again. And sometimes we get caught up in getting to the root cause and then stopping. We got to get to what caused it, but then how do you truly prevent it and make sure that prevention worked? So follow around the whole cycle one time to make sure that, okay, yep, this corrective action is right, and these preventative actions are the right ones to put in place. But then you got to go around the circle. I tell people all the time, 3 times. You need to really dog bird it or bird dog it like 3 times around to make sure that what you did really can really prevent what happened. So that's the piece around why CAPA is important and why you actually need to follow the cycle, because you got to do the training. You got to make sure you're embedding in it and it really is the right preventive actions, so that you don't continue to have the same thing and it becomes a cycle.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Sherry. I think the only thing I would add that we see occasionally with these CAPAs too, similar to maybe a root cause having not been dug into deep enough to actually get to root cause, but we find with CAPA is we get the CA part and that's it, right? So we make that correction immediately, whatever that might be, but we don't put in the preventive action, or we put in a preventive action that, to Sherry's point, isn't sustainable. So when we come back 6 months later and we say, well, we went through a CAPA, it should be fixed. And then we find that whatever we did on that preventive action piece either wasn't sustainable, or maybe we had one incident recently where we actually decided we needed to upgrade some of our food safety equipment, that it just wasn't sufficient. So we had to stay in that corrective action phase until we had time to do our upgrades on the line, and then make sure we come back and check that preventive action, which is that next step, is to make sure that we keep that preventive action in place.
And so when you're doing these CAPAs, there's going to be a tension between how quickly you can get them done, and how thoroughly you want to get them done. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you balance that?
Well, sure, I can follow up on what I was just speaking about, Conrad. So we recently had an unfortunate recall with plastic pieces in one of our products. And in that case, what we did initially in terms of corrective action was we added a lot of extra line checks, right? Because we wanted to be able to make food, but we obviously wanted to make sure we did not have the problem again. So we added a very manual corrective action piece while we waited for equipment to come in, and being able to phase all of that onto our line so that we could get those systems upgraded and put the preventive action in place. So you spend some time doing that corrective action, and having the checks and balances in place with, having your leadership in your facilities coming in and checking that those corrective actions are working until you get that broader system in place. And it always takes longer than you want it to. It always takes longer to get the equipment, longer to engineer the line, all that sort of stuff. But you stay with it until you've completed it, I think, is the most important part. You don't lose sight of it until you know it's closed completely.
And that system verification is so important. And then the reapplication piece, because if you have the issue in one facility, 9 times out of 10, you have in another one. So how are you making sure you're closing the loop by looking at the other facilities and sharing it with your external partners? Because you want them to prevent the same thing that you may have had. So how do you really make sure you get to the system verification and you reapply those learnings across the network? I know one of the things that we used to struggle with is, okay, how are we sharing the right information so that people don't have to learn the same thing over again? I'm like, please learn from my failure or our opportunity so that you don't have to actually go through it too. So it's important that you actually reapply those learnings across the network.
I think we're missing a little bit of an element in this discussion. So hang up on me if I'm out of line here. I think we're missing that often CAPAs, due to the time pressure you might be talking about, Conrad, we just don't take the time to get the right people involved in them. So it becomes a it becomes the responsibility and the espoused value of CAPAs is that we have some really, really fantastic food safety leaders, and they're going to take care for this one. So I think that's one of the changes that we have to also just keep driving for, is that if there's a CAPA where there's some of the preventative actions, like you said, well, both of you have said that sometimes we lack a little bit in, that requires people to start doing things in a different way in the factory. Well, is the HR manager part of that CAPA? To actively embed those changes into the HR, into the people system. Sherry, sorry, I saw you wanted to drop in there.
No, that's that assessment piece that I was talking about, that second block. So accountability and assessment, because you got to assess who needs to be part of the CAPA so that you don't have the repeat issues. Because if you just, it's not a quality function. I know sometimes people think it's quality owns it. No, realistically, guys, a lot of times I make my ops own it if it's in a manufacturing plant. Now, quality and food safety has to be at the table, but we got to make sure the right people are there to help with what are the right root cause, root cause, and then what are the right preventative actions that you truly can do to prevent it. So that assessment block on that diagram I put up is all about assessing who needs to be at the table to have the discussion to make sure that you're getting at the root.
Couldn't agree more. We should all have a tiger that looks over our shoulder, because that really worked.
Yeah, I want to just emphasize what Sherry said. She's 100% right, because so often, particularly in our third party relationships, we find it is on quality, and we don't have operations or manufacturers or leaders there. It's like, oh, it's a quality issue. Quality is going to fix it. 100%. It's so important that quality is owned by the entire organization.
Yes. And that's why a lot of times, like even when you set people's goals at the beginning of the year, every person in your plant should have quality and food safety, some type of action on their PDP. We call it PDP, or like your work and development plan, to make sure you have accountability. It is not just QFS. We will never win food safety culture if it's only QFS. It has to be every leader within an organization.
I don't know about you, Conrad, but I'm glad that we don't have too much passion on this webinar.
I was just going to say, Lone, this is so great to have both Stefanie and Sherry here. You were both so passionate. And, we were talking about the SHINE model. This is really, our first one about underlying beliefs. And I can tell that both of you have so much passion for this. And it's so important that person is at the table too, because you need to have people who really care and really want to fix problems. And so with that, we're actually running out of time. So I want to say thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. We have tons of questions that we didn't get to. So I'll shoot those over to the panelists, and if they're able to answer some of those, they will. We will also try to address them in future webinars. And of course, our white paper that will come out after this episode is done. Our next webinar will be October 29th. The same platform. So please join us on Zoom. You can register hopefully using this QR code. I hope this one works. If it doesn't, you will get an email that has all of the information from today's webinar, along with how you can register for future ones. And we will be talking about interrogating your assumptions to understand and verify the assumptions that underpin your company's culture. So really looking forward to that with our guests from Novonesis and ConAgra. And please hang on to take the quick survey at the end of this. There's about 4 or 5 questions. So we'd really love that, so we can continue to improve our series. And Conrad, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I just want to thank the panelists for joining us today and all of you for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.